Hi, I'm Will.
And I'm Luke.
And this is Will and Luke Discuss,
a vodcast
and podcast
where we discuss content related to psychology,
personal growth,
self-development,
and well-being. This episode, we're discussing
Mindful Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, a simple path to healing, hope and peace by Seth Gillihan. How would you summarise what the book's about then, mate?
Yeah, so Seth Gillihan is a clinical psychologist, and he practiced CBT for years as a psychologist, and found it was really helpful for the people he worked with, and helped a lot of people, overcome anxiety, depression, overthinking, rumination. Made some real life changing, work with people, which was like really nice to hear. And the way he spoke about that was really lovely. But he said that there was an element that was missing from his practice, that he felt he could go a level deeper. And I think that was particularly informed by a period of illness in his life where he found that CBT wasn't working for him. I think he had a major health scare and had a bout of depression, and he wanted to, add another layer or another dimension, as he would put it, to CBT. And that's where the mindfulness aspect comes in. And I guess just for context, I discovered this on the Waking Up Sam Harris app, and took a particular interest in that. So obviously the app is focusing on meditation and a specific form of mindfulness, but also wanting to address how we can utilize thoughts and feelings and behaviors to move our life in ways that are positive and in line with our goals and values. So I think it's a really interesting combination. I think there's some useful skills in here worth talking about.
Great. So in the Waking Up app, he has a series of sort of snippets based on one theme at a time, right? And
yes,
if I've got it right, it's largely, is it largely similar to the book, or is the book different to the audio series?
I think the book goes a lot more into, the spiritual aspect of mindfulness, but I think he expands on a lot more topics. On the app, he covers, managing anxiety and managing relationships and managing depression, for example. In the book, he goes a lot more into things around rest and things around work, and a bit more around relationships, and kind of expands on it a lot more, as you imagine a book would do. So, it was great. And I think a really good place to start would be just kind of outlining the model of CBT and what the key aspects of CBT are. And
so he started working purely with CBT, and then you're saying mainly through his own personal experience of illness, kind of found aspects of spirituality and mindfulness which worked for him, and then started integrating that into his psychotherapy practice, and this is the output of that experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think he it's a great book. Really enjoyed it. So
nice.
Be keen to it's nice to kind of get to share with you, and I feel like you have some great insights. So I guess the what he describes CBT as is, a set of techniques that help change our thinking. So the cognitive aspect, our actions, the behavioral aspect, and the feelings as well. So he says, simple changes in what we think and what we do can improve our well-being. But then he brings in the aspect of mindfulness, which is around our relationships to thoughts. So not trying to change thoughts and not trying to sort of reach for certain states of being, but increasing our awareness and being open to life as it is. And he saw a really useful link between the two that he could bring to CBT. So, he quotes Marcus Aurelius at the beginning saying, useful thought and action experienced with acceptance in the presence, which would, it's probably a really nice summary of most
summarize the whole theme.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I think, he breaks it down into three aspects. So, think, act, be. So he says, think is your head. So my mind needs to change my thoughts. Act, which is hands, I need to take action. And be, which is heart, my spirit needed to find presence and acceptance. So he says often in life we want to correct, change bad feelings we have, or things we feel uncomfortable with, or aspects of life that we don't like, things we're ruminating on, things that we're stressing around, and things that we kind of essentially get really caught up in. And he says that when we're going, well, I guess to step back a little bit, he's saying that there's an interaction between thoughts, feelings, and actions. They all impact each other. So the example he gives is that you have the thought that you can't do anything right, and then that leads to having the feeling of sadness, and because of the feeling of sadness you stop leaving the house. So that's one example. He says, feeling down you
don't leave the house for ages, and you're going to feel more down, and like you can't do anything because you haven't been doing anything, so it all feeds back on itself.
Exactly, and that can perpetuate the negative thoughts because you're not leaving the house. He says, feeling down can push thoughts and actions into negative direction. Then we feel sadder and more alone. This is just an example, I guess, and then provokes more negative thoughts, which lead to more negative feelings. So this is, I guess, quite a well-known model. I suppose we don't need to labor it too much, but it's acknowledging that there is an interaction between thoughts, feelings, and actions
and behaviors. And I suppose what sounds like you say, it's a well-known model, so we don't need to go into much detail. But I suppose what is implicit or even explicit in cognitive behavioral therapy is that there is something about your thinking that is incorrect, is irrational in some way, and that's leading you to feel in ways that are unhelpful and leading you to have motivations and then do behaviors that then have this sort of negative feedback cycle. And so therefore the treatment, if you like, is to break down, slow down, look at these thoughts, weigh up the evidence, see how true or not they are, and challenge them enough so that you can feel differently enough to then change what you do and allow a more positive feedback cycle to go round. But then I suppose when he's talking about mindfulness, it's like, well, sometimes let's put it this way. Some mindfulness is a lot about acceptance, right? Looking at what is and accepting reality as it is, which you could argue is kind of counter to change your thoughts. It's kind of saying like accept your inner life as it is. So it'd be sort of interesting to break. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was saying, and I think what he's saying, this isn't a passive approach. It's not a thought of just being like, oh, this thought exists, just let it go or slide away, or necessarily that thoughts are bad, that we can work with them. Essentially, I remember us speaking once before around kind of the model of CBT. A crass criticism of it is that you can go through challenging your negative thoughts, providing evidence to the contrary, proving to yourself that this thought isn't true, or that you might be over exaggerating it through some cognitive distortions that I'll maybe list in a second. But then after that, you still feel like shit. Or you still feel anxious, and it doesn't. I think what he's getting at here, it doesn't address the core underlying, essence of us, that there are things that we can't change, and there's things that we like. Acceptance might be the better route to addressing what's going on in your life, and our core needs. We're not even going to call it a core need, but like we often have needs to resolve fear or move towards pleasure or hide from experience or avoid pain. He's saying that like if you can be more mindful, you can check in with yourself a bit more around like what are you actually trying to do here, because cognitive behavioral strategies might not quite hit the mark, whereas more mindful approach is probably more helpful.
Right. Yeah. And so, would you say he's suggesting that the way I can think about integrating this is that there are some instances where challenging your thoughts enough to feel and do something different is more helpful, or maybe some instances where just accepting things as they are and being able to be with the present is more helpful? And is it about like distinguishing which is a better approach for which situation, or is it more about bringing both together at the same time, or is that not the right way of thinking about it?
Well, I think he's saying, I think he's saying bring both together. So he kind of described, if you think of thoughts, feelings, behaviors as a 3D prism, you make it 4D by adding in the mindfulness aspect of it. And I think
you got your pyramid.
This is probably, exactly. Yeah. I think this is probably something just say from the outset, and I'm aware I'm reading it off here, but he says, mindfulness integration makes it deeper. So he says triangular prism, which is quite funny. It's also he says we can also consider our relationship to thoughts, feelings, and actions. So which changes their quality on how we relate to them. So the same thought could be experienced in different ways. For example, are we identified with thought, or are we observing it with the mind? Are we making room for feelings and emotions, or are we judging and resisting them? When it comes to actions, behaviors, what quality of presence do we bring to those actions or behaviors? Are we doing it mindlessly or bitterly, as if we shouldn't have to do it? Or are we present and open to it, really doing what we're doing? So saying how we relate to challenging feelings, how seriously we take self-critical thoughts, and what quality of presence and awareness affects our actions. So I really like that. It's almost like mindful every step of the way. It's like, am I so strongly identified with this thought that it is therefore going to lead to a feeling? Or am I judging this feeling that I'm having rather than just accepting it as it is without trying to change it? And I guess more onto kind of stuff around behaviors and goals. Like, is this behavior in line with my goals? How does it feel to do something that I know to be good for me versus doing something that feels a bit icky and a bit off, and I'm not quite, a bit like really tuning into your body and listening to that. And I think that what he's saying is like, with this mindful presence, you can reset a bit of a loop that you're mindful every step of the way, and you're not getting too attached, or you're not behaving in ways you don't want, or you're not living your life just trying to move away from bad feelings or move towards good feelings. I think it's a really, it seems very simple, but it's I guess particularly thinking about, the Waking Up app in particular, he's saying it's not around, formal practice, that 10 minutes you sit down in the day. You can be mindful every step of the way, just before you stand up from your desk, or just before you call a friend on the phone, or as you're having the worst day of your life, you can still be mindful and present the whole way through.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a bit. So, we've a long time ago, you and I did a book on acceptance and commitment therapy, which also ties together sort of cognitive behavioral therapy with mindfulness. And a big theme in that was like, sometimes our goals themselves are like avoidance strategies, like. Oh, I want to feel better just because I want to get rid of this stuff and I want to escape it and avoid it. And so, like, give me some techniques so I can get rid of this. And they were saying there that, well, maybe the attitude of wanting to get rid, the relationship you have with those feelings, is itself the heart of the issue. And that if we concentrate on giving you techniques to help you get rid, we're only reinforcing this escape attitude, this flight out of the fight, flight, freeze kind of part of you, this relationship of flight that you're giving to these thoughts or these feelings. And actually, if we reframe the actual issue and don't just take your goal as a given, maybe what you need is to help be with what's actually going on. It doesn't mean you're just going to not do anything about it, but like, first, you might need to accept how you're feeling and what's going on for you before you can take that step of thinking about what might be best to do next.
And it's kind of taking that pause almost to be like, how does this feel? Or is this the same sort of thought I've had before? And being less reactive and more responsive, I suppose, to situations as they arise, and responding in ways that feel meaningful to you based on, you know, how it feels in your body and like how connected you are with yourself and your values. And I think one aspect of CBT, I wonder if you can maybe just explain a bit about it, is core beliefs. And done a whole, I have covered it before, but I guess what's the role of core beliefs in CBT?
Okay, so Aaron Beck, who founded cognitive therapy, talked about 3 cognitive layers. And they're like layers of depth. So on the sort of highest layer, you've got automatic thoughts, right? And these are the literal thoughts you're having in any given moment. They might be images, so you might be mentally rehearsing what's going to happen in a moment. You might be saying a phrase to yourself, it might be mental chatter. But basically it's almost tangible. Like if I stopped and paused you could write that down or show me a movie screen of what you were imagining in that moment. So that's an automatic thought. But then those thoughts, he's saying, are based on certain assumptions or rules we're making in the moment. So I don't know, if my sort of gut assumption is things are going to go really badly, then that might explain why the thought I was having in that moment was being vigilant and predicting all the risks that might happen so I can be prepared for this bad outcome that I think is going to happen, right?
Okay.
And so like, that second layer down are rules or assumptions which sort of guide these negative automatic thoughts. But even those rules or assumptions are only really applicable to certain scenarios. But what we really carry with us everywhere we go is that bottom layer, which is our core beliefs. So the rule, like, or the assumption that, I don't know, assumptions often come in sort of if-then phrases. So, if that person turned around and looked at me, then it means that they're judging me. And maybe I make those sorts of assumptions because I have a core belief that I'm fundamentally inferior or something like that. And that I can take with me wherever I go. So you can think that automatic thoughts are thoughts that are whatever's happening right now in this moment in your mind that you could write down. Assumptions are kind of general assumptions or rules that you take with you into particular scenarios. But the core beliefs are the beliefs you have about yourself or the world that you take wherever you go.
Okay.
So they usually, you can phrase them as I am whatever, or the world is dangerous, or something like that.
Okay. I'm glad I asked. I feel like I answered that. Yeah. And I guess before, I was hoping there's a few different sections that I'd really like to move through with you. I think it would be interesting for people listening, but I guess just quickly touching on the lenses in which we view things through, which CBT would describe as cognitive distortions. So I believe there's 15 that we might refer to throughout the.
Yeah.
I might not list them all, but some of them is, some of the key ones is like, black and white thinking, overgeneralization, discounting the positive.
Before you go into them, can I give you a rule of thumb, connect it to what we just talked about, right?
Yeah, sure.
So if I have a core belief that I'm inferior, and therefore, so what does this mean? Well, I carry this belief around with me, and then I get reality coming back at me, and sometimes reality doesn't suggest I'm inferior, right? But if that belief is strong, I kind of need to warp the reality that's coming in to fit my worldview.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
and so.
Yeah.
Like you've got this, that's the lens that, so I don't know, let's say I'm in the supermarket and I'm about to, get in line for the queue, and someone kind of comes in front of me and jumps the queue. Well, any number of things could have happened there, right? They might not have seen me, they might not have realized I was about to join the queue, and they just sort of saw the spot and went in. But given my core belief, I might assume, well, of course that person cut in front of me because I'm kind of worthless and pathetic and anyone can walk over me and that's fine and I have to deal with that, right? But So going to what you're about to say, so there are a particular number of strategies, cognitive distortions, we might use to help warp reality to fit our core beliefs. And that's what these distortions help us do.
Yeah, and he's asking, well, he's suggesting that we're mindful of the lenses in which we see the world through, and kind of linking to what you're saying, like what the role of that is for us. So, often, and this is where it's kind of very CBT based, like this is where these aspects are like really key, and sort of one of the, I think, the most useful aspects of CBT, to be honest, that I've found. But yeah, so just to list a few, says black and white thinking, overgeneralization, discounting the positive, catastrophizing, and blaming, and emotional reasoning. So there's some of the key ones.
Yeah.
Key ones there. So I was interested in particular. So he's talking. One of the key aspects of what he talks about is finding leverage. So it's a term he uses, saying, reaching our goals is much easier if we have the right tools. So it's matching our intentions in life, like what we want to achieve and our goals and our aims, with the right skills and tools. So he's saying that setting goals is the best way to find leverage. And it's sort of from setting a goal and paying close attention to your experience, you can get real life data about whether this is something that's in tune with what you want and what you wish for, or whether it's feeling out of line with that. And I guess kind of it's leverage at every step of the way, really. So you're kind of noticing, is this thought useful or not useful at that stage? Is this feeling, I hesitate to use the word valid, but is this feeling sort of one I want to embrace, or
helpful?
Is this helpful? Yeah, is this feeling helpful to respond to? Is this a useful? What is this feeling of worry, fear, happiness, joy telling me? So you're paying a lot more attention to that. And then back to what I said earlier, like do these behaviors kind of fit in line with my values? So I think I found that quite interesting. So like the thought of setting a goal first, so saying like act intentionally, because our beliefs shape reality and we act accordingly. So, and he's saying identifying the costs and rewards of our behaviors. And
so what's the leverage part of this?
The leverage part is using essentially by being more in tune with your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, you can be more targeted in the way you think, feel, and behave. So you're getting yourself closer to your goals, and I guess a more fulfilling life if you're able to target it more effectively.
So is it like in any given scenario, a different tool might be more or less helpful, and by setting goals and to experiment with, to like gather data, we can sort of help distinguish which tools or strategies are most helpful for those scenarios.
Yeah. And he's saying, when you build up this data, you learn about the situations or the things you do that move you further away or closer to your goals, and therefore we can see ourselves. It's a chance to see ourselves differently. Essentially, like if we start to behave in ways that are more aligned with ourselves, then that's a positive thing, rather than disconnecting from every step of the way on the opposite side. Like we start to not feel ourselves. And that's kind of an experience that he had. He was feeling really disconnected from his body, his mind, his thoughts, his feelings. And it can lead to this perpetual tiredness, I suppose, and just sort of life's not where you want it to be, because you're not acting in line with your values, I guess, and your kind of existing out of unhealthy core beliefs, I suppose.
He was
he talks about
a researcher, right?
He talks about growing conditions, just to add that in last.
I just remember listening on the app that he was, before doing much psychotherapy, he was doing more research, and he was talking about having a particular job that was like really dull and draining and tiring and not very fulfilling for him. I don't know who that came up in the book, or you know what I'm referring to there, but I was wondering if that was tying into what you're saying, like, and if it would be helpful to use as an example or not. But
yeah, well, I think often you see with like a lot of authors, or people who write books, that they've had a big change in their lives where they kind of hit this point where they realize that, I'm living a lie, or like things can be different, like Sam Harris took ecstasy or MDMA at a party, and he was like, I can think differently about the world. There's more to experience than this. And I guess it's a common feeling. I guess this is where the utility of this comes into play, is that, what is it, like really identifying, like, what is it that we're feeling, to put a negative lens on it, like, what are we, that's even labeling, what are we feeling, in what ways are we feeling disconnected, and what ways do we want life to be different, and what is that down to? And he's saying it's down to all three, like your relationship to your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions, and your goals, and are we doing things that support mindful presence? Are we moving away from certain feelings? And I think often, in his case, there was something he wasn't addressing the totality of his experience when he was ill. Like, he was wanting to move away from it and wishing that things were different. And I guess it would be different for different people, I suppose, wouldn't it? But I'm not sure if I'm kind of answering your question, but essentially it's that he's seeing that there's another way of being, and we learn about ourselves in the process the more we pay attention.
Right. Yeah. And I don't know what's coming up for me about that. I don't know how much this ties in, but like, is actually looking, well, why are my goals my goals? And so, for example, if you're just going in, let's say we take his problem when he talked about having this research job he didn't like. So, he might have gone for some CBT because he was procrastinating and depressed, right? And you could imagine someone focusing on, okay, well, how do we help you stop procrastinating? And maybe we'll do some breathing techniques and help you get close, like set some goals to help you do your work. And but maybe, like, actually the whole point was the whole job was not fulfilling for him. And so rather than how do I do a job I hate better, the goal might become like, well, what's led for me to be okay with doing something that's unfulfilling, and how do I change out of that to do something else? And you're changing the whole like level of the goal there.
Interesting. Yeah, like looking at what the wanting wants. It's
right.
Like really analyzing, like, why do I want these things that I want? Is it out of a genuine interest or a joy? Like, what are you going to find fulfilling? And I think this is probably where it ties into so many of the other books we've read, kind of around goal setting, or he does get you to do what the Tony Robbins program says.
Sorry, I thought you said he gets you to do the Tony Robbins program.
No. So like looking at how, like, doing a really strong inventory of like how are you spending the hours of your day, and what parts of your life are you fully present for, and where are you not present, and what parts of your life are you feeling dissatisfied by. And he gets you to do like the time, or encourages you to do the, how long are you spending on your phone? Is this time well spent? How do you feel after you spend time with family? How do you feel after you spend time with friends? How do you feel when you go to work? Is this, and the only way to really kind of work it out and to live authentically is to sort of respond with behaviors, I suppose, to the situation you're in.
Well, and I suppose that sounds like what I was trying to get at, was it's really getting you to get in touch with your actual values around these things, because goals come out of values, don't they? But if the goals are based on values, I don't know, let's say like, so you want to work on your anger, and it's like, well, you could do that, but if you're not in touch with why you're getting angry, it might be actually you're around people you really don't like a lot of the time.
Yeah, great example.
Maybe your anger's fine, but like, what is it that's led you to accept being in this situation all the time? And maybe you do well to work that out and like put yourself in relationships that are more fulfilling for you and don't piss you off as much. I mean, I'm not saying that's always the answer of anger, of course, but like, unless you've actually sort of diagnosed the level at which this goal is coming from, then you might be just putting more fuel on the fire. And I suppose, this persistent mindful presence on thoughts at that top part of the pyramid, that presence of awareness of your behavior as you're doing it and the attitudes of which you're taking these behaviors, the attitudes you have towards your thinking and towards your feeling might help you get closer to that deeper value. And then you can build goals off of that bit.
Yes. I've something I guess just kind of slightly separate, but I've found this really useful around decision making in particular. Like often when faced with a decision, it's not as simple as like a pros and cons list, right? It's like, because every decision would have a pros and cons. I suppose, and like
sometimes you can like, and it depends how much weight you put on each, right? The con list might have one con and the pros might have 10, but if you really hate that con, you might still want to go that way, you know? So I agree. And
and I think I found what I found previously with decision making when I suppose taken a CBT approach, sort of challenged my thoughts and provided contrary evidence and sort of like, oh, maybe it won't end up as bad as I think it will be, and it just didn't land. It was just sort of at a very cognitive level. It was at like the thinking level, and it's just like, maybe I can try and see this differently. But the reality was that, like, at a deeper level, there was something in me that almost wanted to be told the answer or have the decision made for me. And I guess, more recently, I guess in the last while, I've just been having decisions to make and that sort of thing. And it's like, what is the basis for making a good decision? And there's stuff on, listen to your gut or, make logical decisions. And there's a time and a place for both. But I think ultimately it's the more in touch you are with, the true, whether it's like a small voice in you, I'm hoping you can maybe add to this, but I found the more in touch with my body I am and not looking outside of myself for an answer. Or sort of, support being like, oh, you should do this thing, or that sounds like a good idea, or getting other people to sort of validate decisions I make either way. It's I've found a lot more satisfaction from, I guess, making decisions from a lot more of a centered place, like internal decisions. I hope I'm explaining that well, but I guess a lot of that is driven by meditation practice, like being a lot more in touch with my body, being a lot more aware of when a thought is probably unwise or a little bit distorted, or when a feeling might just be, it's not anxiety, it's just that I stood up really quickly, and not labeling feelings as good or bad necessarily, but there's something kind of deep about this sort of practice that really helps with decision making. Great. Well, no, it's a really good point. Like, you can't use pure reason to make a decision, because at the end of the day, a decision has to have a value attached to it. But then I suppose the flip side of the coin, making decisions purely on emotion, is that, well, one of the cognitive distortions, right, is emotional reasoning. I'm scared, therefore this situation is dangerous. I feel guilty, therefore I'm bad. And so there's but then obviously that feelings and reasoning is all we have, so they can't both be wrong. But there's like a deeper level of awareness that it's like, okay, yes, I have this feeling that this is scary, but that doesn't mean
it's not a value for me still to do it. So let's listen to more of what's going on.
Yeah.
And there might be pros and cons, and that might be worth taking into account, but they all have to be ultimately attached to what I value. Otherwise they're meaningless, right? So it's and I suppose ultimately there's a deeper I don't know what you'd call it, like your true self or your organismic self, if you're into person-centered theory. But like when something is really of value to your true self, it's like it might take quite a lot of mindfulness to get used to the difference between what are my defenses just trying to have me escape or attack something, and what do I actually want for me. Yeah.
I think what he has a section in the book on is called like say yes. So it's a lot around the acceptance side of things we spoke around, but like the only way you can really make a full, I guess, whether you want to call it educated or in touch decision, is by being fully open to all the feelings, emotions, thoughts that come at that point in time. Like if you're sort of cherry picking, it's like, oh, this feels just uncomfortable, so I'm just going to focus on the happy bit, or the bit that feels good. I think it's sort of, and I guess I feel like I've read a load of books that maybe not struggle to, but have made different attempts to describe what wisdom is. And it's like, it's being able to sit with any of the experiences that you have and being able to not try and change it or not try and force it or push it away. And from that, so many books describe that this wisdom rises out of that. And it's, I guess I probably will never do as good a job of articulating as some people have, but there's something in that I'm like, yeah, that's good. Like if I can fully experience things no matter what, without judgment, without trying to change them, then from there comes, wiser action, wiser thoughts, potentially, and more authentic feelings.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. So it's like, how do I gather all the data? And actually, if our fear or guilt or shame or anger or something is screaming the loudest, and then we try and push it away, like all the more subtle feelings will never get a chance, right? So I suppose that's where the mindfulness comes in, that if we can sort of tune into what's screaming the loudest and stay with it, we might give anything else that's there that also has a voice a chance to say, well, I also feel this way about it. There's a part of me that does want to do this. That's why I signed up for in the first place. Yeah.
I just to kind of just switch up, there is a section on mindful action, and there was just one quote from there that I really liked. We don't need to kind of sit on it for too long, but he's saying mindful action, it's about being more deliberate in what we choose to do. Step into mindful acceptance, which is in line with reality. So not getting too caught up in time constraints or neglecting ourselves, which makes us out of alignment. But he's saying when you stop struggling, it leads to congruence between your mind and your actions, which is kind of a summary of what we've just been speaking about. And I'm feeling that at the moment. It's a interesting way of being, I guess. Yeah.
Well, and I think it really highlights a potential common problem with pure CBT, is that the goals and issues for which you might be coming into it might all be like sort of escapism desires. I don't want to feel like this. I want to push it away. I'm repeating myself from earlier. And if you just stay on that level, then you're, a lot of what you're doing is, yes, you might be challenging your thoughts to feel differently, to act differently, but it's also it's all because you're struggling with how you're feeling. And actually maybe the first layer is tuning more into how you're feeling, rather than finding strategies to push away how you're feeling. And then you can actually gain all the evidence like you talked about, not just cognitive pros and cons, but the more felt evidence to actually then you have data to make more informed and deliberate decisions.
I'm curious. I feel like I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but curious what your experience of doing yoga has been in terms of becoming a bit more in touch with your body and maybe some of the positive effects of that. Because he talks about this in the book. There's a chapter called like love your body, and it's basically saying, offer your body more love and attention, and don't lose attention to your body. Because that's your way of connecting to the present. And I guess I'm wondering if there's anything you've gleaned from any yoga classes you've done or your practice over the years, and whether that ties into anything we're saying here.
Yeah. Well, I suppose yoga forces you in a way, like if you're trying to do a balance and you start thinking about the past or the future, you'll just fall over. So like, whereas if you're just sitting and doing sitting mindfulness, you can potentially get distracted for quite a long time without realizing. If you get distracted during yoga, you'll know pretty soon. So it has that benefit. You're actually working out to some degree. So it also really encourages helpful breathing. And yeah, I suppose thirdly, you get to know bits of your body and sensations that you would otherwise never get in touch with. And I found it also really helped me like learn the difference between wrong pain and just discomfort that's okay. So like I say wrong pain, that's a bad phrase. Potentially unhealthy pain. Like pain, it's like, no, you shouldn't go into that. Like that's not good. That's going to pull something or pop something, versus a discomfort that's like, that's all right. Like you can stay there and it's not pleasant, but it's not doing you any harm. And obviously I might be wrong about that, but I have the felt sense that I've learned to tell the difference. And hopefully that translates not just physically and physiologically, but emotionally as well. The difference between like what's okay to sit with versus what's actually real information you should probably do something about, because more damage will be done if you don't. Yeah. So yeah, I love yoga. It's great stuff. Always feel better for it. Never regret doing a class. Yeah.
We'll be doing plenty of it in a few weeks time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll be good. Cool. I guess is there anything you wanted to ask me? I feel like I've asked you a few questions, but I guess I read the book, but you've got so much knowledge. I'm just trying to hear a lot from you. There's a few other chapters around addressing anger or mindfulness in relationships, the impact of technology, procrastination. I'll just throw those out there if there's anything that interests you.
Great. Okay, so maybe because we've jumped around a lot, maybe if I just sort of summarize the key aspects as I've seen them from you.
Yeah, cool.
So you've got, I really like this triangle to pyramid thing, because I think that sums it up really nicely. So you've got your sort of classic CBT model, which is your thinking affects how you feel affects what you do, and that can spiral around each other for better or worse, and oftentimes for worse, right? We can get ourselves in negative spirals. And also then whatever core beliefs we've built from our life experiences then get filtered, distorted through lenses that perpetuate the cycle. And so CBT teaches us to notice our thinking and assumptions and challenge them. But he's saying here, on each of those angles of the triangle, you can apply, or we've got this fourth dimension of present awareness. Would you call it that? Mindfulness, I suppose, like actually seeing what your relationship is to your behavior, what your relationship is to your feelings, what your relationship is to your thoughts. And if we're struggling on that fourth dimension, like pushing away and hating ourselves, or wanting our thoughts or feelings to not be there, then maybe our focus should be more not on changing our behaviors and thinking, at least initially, but more on coming to peace with our relationship to each of those. And then maybe from that point, we're more in touch with ourselves, more in touch with our values.
Yeah.
And it's, we can make sort of hopefully more clearer decision making.
Great summary.
So the question would be, let's go into the relationship one. That stands out for me the most. How would he apply that to relationships?
Yes, there's a few different aspects to it, and I guess he does build in some of the cognitive distortions into this. So, but I'll kind of start with the mindful aspect. So he's saying, obviously, relationships, and this goes for friendships and romantic relationships, or relationships with anyone really, is that they can be a source of pleasure or pain, and they can be a chance to increase connection, or they can be a chance to have conflict. And he's saying that with this approach, we can be more authentic, more present, and more available in our relationships. And kind of what you were saying, like you might realize from this experience that someone's like, wow, this person's incredible, and I'd really like to be a friend with them, or you might see people in a different way, or you might go, this person's not good to be around, they cause me stress and I need to distance myself from them. But so the mindful aspect is that being open to seeing somebody as they are, and being entirely present and available when you're with them. So, when you're not on your phone, when you're spending time with them, and you're saying that I am here and I am with you, and you're kind of accepting them being in your life at that point in time, and noticing how you feel in that moment, and like how that influences how you interact with them differently when you're actually more present with people. Because he's saying in friendships or relationships, we come in with all these cognitive distortions that this person is this way, or they always act like this, or we have expectations about how they're going to be with us, or we hold things they've done in the past against them now, and we see things through certain lenses when we're with them. So that's kind of building in the CBT aspect of it. He's saying, so it gets you to see through what is some of the negative assumptions you have when you're with somebody, what's a fantasy, when you're got black and white thinking about somebody, when you're casting judgments on them, or you're making presumptions around the way they're talking to you or treating you. So he's saying, notice those feelings and pay attention to them as a way of sort of experiencing people more fully, which I think was it was really nice. And I guess there is a flow between thoughts, feelings, and actions when it comes to being in the presence of somebody else, which may seem kind of obvious after everything we've spoken about, but it's I liked it. It was a good chapter. It was sort of just being like, like sometimes you will have a difficult conversation, and you can bring mindful awareness to the feeling of discomfort without hating the other person or something like that, or or not ignoring the negatives because you have this predetermined idea that this person's going to be your best friend and nothing they can do is you know what I mean? Yeah, you kind of know what I'm getting at. I've been speaking for a while, but
so largely there's the principle you might guess of bringing mindful awareness to your interactions. And you could talk all day about how that's more and more hard to do with like phones and technology and stuff. And then I like this idea that relationships can come with connection and like bonding and all that good stuff, and it can come with conflict. But that's it's normal too. Obviously, from I view conflict very broadly as simply as if any two people have a different worldview on something, or even a different preference, then there is a conflict. There's a mismatch. It doesn't mean there's an argument. That doesn't mean there's like hard feelings or hatred or anything like that. But the thing needs resolution in some way. That sort of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. You need to find some sort of if you're going to maintain connection, then differences somehow need to be transcended in relationships. And yeah, I suppose I also heard you saying that bringing that mindful awareness can help you notice when you're bringing all your old shit into new relationships, all your old predictions and assumptions, and or maybe even just your mood that day,
which will lead to behaviors in how you're acting around the person. Are you like engaged? Are you withdrawn from them? Are you being accommodating? There's
potentially reflexive and non-deliberate actions as well that you might regret. And ultimately, I suppose, learning, like, is this a relationship I want to foster, or is it one I want to move away from? And that's okay as well, but doing that from a very deliberate, values-based place, which can only really come from, present. Well, that what we talked about, that data of if you're present with yourself and what you're feeling, then you're more in touch with what your values really are. Did he say anything about conflict resolution?
Conflict, what did he say? I think the thing I could probably link to that is, he says, watch the beliefs and filters we put on people around should or shouldn't. So like, they shouldn't be disagreeing with me, or they should think the way I think. And we kind of end up outsourcing our sense of well-being to other people, and we can be very protective of our own opinions and that sort of thing. So that would sort of relate to conflict, that if we're getting really uptight or wound up by a conflict, it's worth acknowledging, what am I bringing to this that's contributing to this feeling of distress or discomfort? Is it down to it could be down to your behavior, like if you're sort of acting in a threatening way. It could be down to your thought patterns, potentially. It's like, oh, am I judging this person before I've had a chance to hear them out, for example? Or or do I think that everyone should have the same opinion as me, otherwise they're unintelligent or stupid? Or, is them expressing themselves in a certain way just because I feel, excited by that, or just because I feel scared by that? Does that mean that they're a bad person? So I guess, like each step of the way is sort of a chance to just stop for a second before we
and generally
further to the conflict and create a cycle.
That rule of thumb of first checking, what am I bringing to this if there is a conflict, kind of taking responsibility for that before jumping to those conclusions and acting on those distortions. It's always easier said than done, isn't it? But it's good principles to aim for.
That's good. Nice. Any other sections I mentioned that you're interested in, or feel like you've gotten the gist?
That one stood out. Was there? Maybe say them to me again. What were the ones left?
So what's there left to go with? So how about I'll give you two to choose from. So working with procrastination, or addressing problematic anger.
Let's go with procrastination. Help me with my procrastination.
Okay, so he says it can be stressful when we feel like we run out of time and can find it hard to get started. These are the two main reasons why we procrastinate.
So run out of time or find it hard to get started?
And finding it hard to get started.
Okay.
So, and when we finally get into it, we're rushed, even when we know it's hard. So he says it's rooted in two fears: that one, will do a bad job, or we put it off to avoid punishment.
Okay.
So And we have these kind of we have these thought patterns that it's going to be unpleasant, tedious, or annoying to do. And that's like negatively reinforced over time. Or like every time I start an assignment, it's not going to be good. I guess I'm saying assignment, task. Every time start something, it's going to, I won't do it well enough if I don't get started. If I'm not going to do it well, I won't do it at all. Attitude, or we reinforce procrastination by procrastinating. Essentially,
it sounds circular.
Yeah. So it's I guess what he said. Yeah, so he's saying we learn to repeat it in the future. So when we do something that makes us avoid negative experience, that makes us we avoid it. We learn to repeat it in the future. We find strategies to avoid, and this is strengthened and repeated. We do something easy to distract ourselves, and then we get relief. So there's also a loop that gets built when you do something easy instead of the hard thing. You're like, oh, it feels nice to send that email, or kind of do that easy thing instead of the difficult task. CBT aims to work with this fear and resistance. He says you should study it, be open to discomfort. We don't have to be comfortable. Life opens up when we are willing to be uncomfortable. Find forward motion and the next most important step.
Okay, so
David Allen of him. Yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah, great. So it's either like deadlines or getting started are kind of at the heart of it, and I suppose that will either get punished or do a bad job, has us put off, and then doing it will be boring or unpleasant or whatever, and then we get ourselves in these feedback loops where we keep finding something that we can get quick dopamine hits from, quick bits of mastery. It's like, well, I can wash up these dishes or get some pleasure playing this video game, and then that just reinforces, because the relief we get from putting it off just reinforces putting it off. Okay, so that's a cycle I heard, and the sort of solution is to be able to, I suppose, emotionally tune in and be okay with that discomfort, and then go and David Allen the thing and really drill down into what's the next action.
Well, there's a bit of Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, which is a book I haven't read, but I feel like knowing the title, I've read the book. is that like we can feel like we can't be bothered, and we can worry that this isn't going to be good enough, but we can still get started. There is a forward motion to take. Like we can, and it's also building up a level of, maybe a bit broader than procrastination, but like we can build up a level of resilience to discomfort. Like we're okay feeling uncomfortable. Like that's just a feeling, but it's not the thought that I'm worthless or something like that, or we start behaving so we don't go out the house because we're having a feeling that, we're uncomfortable. You can see how the cycle could begin. So it's what I like is that he's kind of gone through many different scenarios, whether it's relationships, anger, anxiety, procrastination, whatever it is, and it's by bringing more mindful presence to life. It has such wide reaching implications. Like like your relationships will be better if you pay attention. You will manage your anxiety better if you understand it better. Like you will procrastinate less if you can understand what are the contributing factors towards you procrastinating, and then therefore, if you have a better relationship with your thoughts and feelings, you might end up being more kind and more compassionate to yourself. Like it's definitely got elements of acceptance and commitment therapy. Accepting things, and the and compassion focused therapy we did as well. By Paul Gilbert. That was it draws in a lot of those other aspects. And I think compassion is probably another layer to this. We learn to be less critical of our thoughts, or we learn to be less critical when we do things that are out of line with our values. And eventually we build up. Well, I guess the goal is to do more things that you know to be good for you than bad for you, and you start kind of responding to thoughts that feel more useful to you, and you start leaning into feelings. Now, you start kind of responding to feelings with behaviors that feel true and honest and valid to you, rather than responding from fear or striving. You know, it's
doing those things with a helpful and compassionate attitude.
Yeah.
Because I think that's key, isn't it? Because you can start making all the right decisions and challenging your thoughts, but if internally you're like, "Don't bloody do that again, you idiot!" Like, and it's always a struggle. It's like, come on, you could and so it's not just about acting on your values with each decision point, is it? But it's also about the relationship we have with ourselves as we do that.
And in particular to behaviors, you know, what's the kindest way to proceed?
Yeah.
You know, what are the attitudes and thoughts and feelings I want to bring to this behavior?
Yeah.
You know, do I want to hang up this laundry with some joy, or do I want to just hate the whole thing?
Resentful,
you know? And then, but also, I know it's kind of funny, but also understanding like what the impact of doing stuff you don't want to do with a negative mindset has on you over time. You learn just to hate things you don't like doing. Whereas like if you could embrace being like, oh, it's actually, maybe it's nice, I just don't have to think too much and I can just relax. And,
especially with those things that you will do for the rest of your life anyway, like hanging at the washing.
Oh God, yeah.
And because just one thing I want to say to the other side of procrastination is sometimes like, okay, yes, maybe most of the time we're usually taking the perspective of we've already taken it as a given that this is something we should do, is in line with our values, and we're putting it off for reasons that are I don't know, not in line with the present or with acceptance, or because of old stuff we're bringing to this task about fears of punishment and things. But sometimes a procrastination might be onto something, right? Sometimes it might be like, you know what, for once and for all, I'm never going to do this bloody thing again. I hate it and I'm done with it. And maybe that's all right. Yeah. So there's that. Again, it comes down to, well, what is the core value here? And maybe it's something like the hanging out your washing, where it's like, well, I don't find this pleasant, but I am going to wash my clothes. I'm not going to pay someone else to do it. So I will be doing this once a week forever. So I'm going to accept that I want to take a positive attitude. Or maybe it's something that's, you know what, this just isn't worth it to me anymore. I'd be happy to never do this task for the rest of my life. And that's okay with me too. So it's really drilling down whether you actually want to do this thing and whether that's coming from a sort of healthy value set.
I think for me, just to kind of wrap up what's been my main takeaway, is that because, you know, doing, you know, kind of daily using a meditation app and doing a lot of practice and just something I'm just generally wanting to do more of, this has been a book that's really outlined the ways I can implement this in various aspects of my life.
Right.
Like the actual, you know, when it comes to work, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to, you know, this and that, you know, it's it was a good one to do. I liked it. It sort of tied a lot in for me. And so someone who maybe is already well into the mindfulness and meditating, if you come in at that angle, it'll help bring that more applicable, not just to when you're sat meditating, but during your actual interactions or decision making or daily tasks. And I suppose the other side, people who might already be familiar with CBT, it brings in the more kind of spiritual, getting in touch with yourself, making sure things are, you know, learning about yourself, whether things are really in line with your values, and having that more congruent internal relationship to your thoughts, feelings, behavior. I like that, more congruent relationship. That's nice. Yeah. All right, mate.
Cool.
I reckon that'll do us. Till next time.
See you soon, mate.
See you, mate.
Bye.